Hello and welcome to Corner Gallery. Today I have with me Suzanne and her husband Garland. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about quilting and some of the work that goes into it and the inspiration behind it. So Suzanne, how are you today?
I'm fine, except being nervous to be here with you.
How about yourself, Garland? You aren't nervous, are you? You seem very
I'm
cool
not nervous.
and calm.
I'm very calm.
You're a professional. We might have to have you on.
I was the chauffeur.
Ah, okay. So Suzanne,
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, we've been married 57 years.
Okay.
Pretty amazing,
Wow.
right? Is it 57 or 58?
I lost count.
Yeah. And we have 4 children, and I was a stay-at-home mother and was making little utility quilts for the kids. Checked out a library book and started trying to make quilts. And then they started getting more complicated.
Okay.
And then they started being quilts that didn't really cover people on beds anymore.
Right.
And I'm just intrigued with some of the medieval and ancient images from the past and trying to kind of adapt them to fabric.
Okay.
It's a challenge.
So over time, then, it just went from normal quilts, and after a while, you
That's right.
decided to kind of make it a little more artsy, so to say, spice it up and do some different things.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes, I started out with patchwork, where you
Okay.
put geometrical pieces together, and then I got into applique, where I apply fabric and make more pictorial quilts.
Okay. And Garland, you said that you worked at WashU. Can you tell us a little bit about that? You were...
I'm a scientist, but
scientist.
basically I taught in the medical school, first-year medical students,
Okay.
for 50 years.
Gotcha. So I imagine you spent a lot of time on campus then.
I
with
spent
that.
a lot of time at the medical school, yeah.
Gotcha. So at what point did you come home and start noticing, well, wait, Suzanne's doing some interesting stuff with these quilts?
It became very clear very quickly that this was a passion, right? And that I better get on board.
That's great. So how do you assist her in that process?
I'm the internal critique person, and if I say something she likes, she listens.
Gotcha. That's good.
So I've been working on enhancing my skill at saying what she likes.
Well, it's nice to have an in-house
It
critique.
is,
huh?
it is. He's very supportive, and I'm grateful for that.
That's fantastic.
It
Nice
is.
to have a helping hand
Yes.
in that. So tell us a little bit about this process. How long do these quilts typically take? What goes into getting the fabrics together and everything?
Well, that's an interesting question. With the one right behind me, I started with the color of the rocks.
Okay.
And then tried to blend the fabrics that I used in the quilt with the rocks. And this quilt was adapted from woodcuts from 1565. The woodcuts, of course, were in black and white and were individual. And from the Dreams of Pantagruel. And I selected 3 of the woodcuts and put them together and added bugs and various things to make a complete whole. The interesting thing about this particular manuscript from 1565 is that Salvador Dali also took some of the woodcuts. He kept them in black and white. He had them individually. He ended up drawing little things around these woodcuts, but he didn't give credit to the manuscript, and I was sort of appalled at that.
Wow.
I thought he should have given credit, because some of them are weird enough that you would think Salvador Dali would have thought of them.
Wow. So do you generally, with every quilt you make, try to start with a focal point and then build from there?
Often, and I rarely know what it's going to turn into. I may start with, for this one, the Luttrell Salter images. They were so different in size, I had to come up with a format, but I still wasn't sure what the border was going to be, so they evolve. The other thing that may be a little different for what I do now versus other quilters is that I still work by hand. I still applique by hand, I do the embroidery by hand, I do the quilting by hand.
All of this by hand?
All of this is by hand,
Wow.
except for these straight edge borders.
Right.
That I do on the machine, but everything else is by hand. So this may take a year.
Wow.
And I'm the last 10% still quilting by hand. Most people like making the tops, but they don't like spending the time quilting them.
Of course. Well, I had a girlfriend that was a fashion design major, and watching her sew garments, I was like, God, that's a time-consuming
It's
process.
time-consuming.
So obviously something this detailed, the fact that you could sit there and do it by hand, kudos to you. 'cause
Thank you.
that's-
But you
that's a
know,
lot.
while the kids were growing up, it was something I could work on, put it down, go off and help them, pick it up. You know, it's something you can pick up 5 minutes at a time.
Gotcha. So, Garland, do you just kind of stop in time to time and take a look at it and just see the process go along?
It's
or do you
really,
look at the...
it's vicarious for me. You know, what I've worked on as a scientist are things you start, and 10 years later you'll find out whether or not it was a good idea.
Right.
This way, every day I can get and see what she's done, where she's going, talk to her about what's going on.
Gotcha.
He's really cheered me on before, too. I mean, I've started things and I'm thinking, it's just not working, it's not working. And he says, just keep going, keep going. And when it's finished, when the border's finally on it, oh, it did work.
Yeah.
You know, so he's really a help.
Well, thank you, Garland, for being the helping hand behind this and helping to push
I'll
her
take all the
along.
credit.
Please do, please. So before you start these out, do you draw out maybe a picture, or do you just kind of have in your head how you want this to look?
Well, I find some images, like the woodcuts, for instance, and then I take these images that are very, very small to a copy store and enlarge them to the size that I would like to make them. And then I start putting them together on a big piece of paper, adding the rocks and the bugs and the birds and the various and sundry things to make a complete whole.
Okay.
And then from that large drawing, I start making my patterns, because I have to make a pattern for each piece that I sew on.
Right. So would you say that this is a pretty expensive habit or hobby, with all the materials that you have to gain, and then all the process you have to go through to blow up the images and make sure that they're to size?
Well, since it takes me so long to make one piece, I will say no, it's not that expensive.
Right.
For people who are having other people quilt them and can just crank out these, tops,
Right.
maybe well, I have to admit, fabric has gotten more expensive. It's between $12 and $15 a yard now. So that does add up to, an expense.
Right.
And if you look at all the different fabrics I have in this, then,
Yeah.
I usually buy half yards at a time.
You should see her stash.
Oh, I believe it's got to be big.
Well, it has to be, because
Yeah.
that's her palette.
Right.
Okay, and this year's green, you'll never see it again for 5 or 6 years.
It's
So
true.
if you
it's
want that
trendy.
green, you buy that green
Right.
now.
So you got to
and
stock
save
up
it.
on it now.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I guess that, like you said, that would help, since it takes so long to make these. You can kind of spread out the expenses of it.
That's right.
You don't have to buy in bulk and do everything at once,
Right.
and so it doesn't add up as quickly. So at what point did these transition from something you like to do to people giving you recognition for it?
Well, when our youngest son was in high school, I was volunteering. I was doing, everything around the house with 4 kids. He said, Mom, you just don't do anything. Because we live in a neighborhood with a lot of professional people. No, I'm not a professor. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I was making quilts, but he didn't consider that anything. And I thought, well,
Right. I'll show you.
So I entered a quilt show, and it was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and it won first prize, $500. And suddenly I did something to him. And then I got the judges' critiques, because I'm self-taught. I really wanted the judges to tell me what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong. So I kind of fixed what they said I was doing that could be improved, and I entered it somewhere else and won $1,000 best of show. And I thought, well, this is fun.
Yeah.
So it just sort of evolved from there. I mean, I've won 2 Best Hand Workmanship Awards from the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky, the American Quilter Society show, and those were purchase prizes for 2 quilts.
Okay.
So, but one of those quilts took me 3 years.
Wow.
Not that I worked on it all the time, but it does take a long time.
That's quite a task. And I admire your dedication to these quilts also, because a lot of people don't have the patience for even making things like this, but definitely not to spread out so much time over making it.
Well, one of the quilts that I entered in the American Quilter Society show in Paducah, Kentucky, I did 3/4 of it, and I was just sick of it because it didn't have any weird animals on it. It didn't have any weird people or bugs.
Right.
I thought, this is just boring. It's got flowers, but, it needed something. So I just put it away. And like a year later, I got it out and looked at it and thought, well, it's not that bad. I guess I'll go out and finish it.
Right.
Entered it and won $3,000 for a prize.
So
So,
you can-
so
Yeah.
I can't win all the time, obviously, but
Right. Well, it wouldn't be fair. You're too good. They can't give
no,
you every
no,
prize.
no, no. Well, no, but now most of the awards go to the fancy machine quilting, which is fine. You know, things evolve, and
Right.
this quilting has evolved into a lot of machine quilting.
So do
That's
you
fine.
ever sell your quilts?
Well, by accident to the quilt museum, they were
Right.
purchase prizes.
Wow.
That was a great deal. She made this quilt for me. She entered it into this contest. It won a purchase prize. The museum got the quilt. I got the thanks, and she got the $10,000.
Well, I thought you paid the taxes. I thought
Well, I
that
did
was
pay
What
the
a deal.
taxes. What a
I
deal.
got the $10,000. He paid the taxes. Sounds like a good deal, doesn't it?
All right. So, Garland, do you get to go with her to these competitions and
I
get to see that
usually do.
environment?
I usually
Yeah.
do, yeah. I mean, normally the quilts are sent to the competition. So it's only if it, like the big quilt show in Paducah, that we
Right.
would go and spend some time there.
Gotcha.
And the International Quilt Show in Houston is huge,
They're
too.
the
I
two
mean, they
big-
may get 53,000 people come in for a weekend, which is kind of big.
So you get to do quite a bit of traveling with
Well,
this.
I teach around the country, too.
Wow.
That's,
do everything.
He doesn't come with me usually when I teach, unless it's close.
Right.
But I have Tulsa coming up and 2 places in Florida. Last summer I was in Marble Falls, Texas. And the summer before I was in Telluride, Colorado. They wanted me to judge the quilt show, and I said, I don't like judging quilt shows because I want everyone to win.
Right.
So I said, but Garland can do it. So Garland judged the quilt show.
So it's on my resume now, quilt judge.
Quilt judge. Well, you've been working at it for years, so you might as well put it on there by now. It's a bona fide skill.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about having your work featured. I know we have you now in our gallery here at Lindenwood, but what other galleries have you been featured in?
I had a retrospective exhibit in the National Quilt Museum. I had one in Golden, Colorado. They have a quilt museum. I'm often invited to send quilts to be exhibited various places. I had a retrospective exhibit in the Sam Houston Memorial Museum in Huntsville, Texas. Oh, that's about it.
Plaza Frontenac.
Oh, yes. Oh, that was fun. Oh, goodness. It's 20 years ago, I had a friend who lost a son to leukemia, and she had the idea of raising money for pediatric cancer research by having an exhibit of my quilts. So Plaza Frontenac contributed an empty space, and we had this exhibit for a month. And I guess they did raise $53,000 for pediatric cancer research
Whoa.
with this exhibit. Pretty impressive.
That is impressive.
And so the wonderful thing was the research scientists at Children's Hospital invited us to come learn about the research that they were doing, because of the contribution of the funds
Right.
from the exhibit.
Wow. So with the particular pieces we have over in our art gallery, I know that John kind of went through with you and
Yes, he
helped
did.
choose some. How did you decide on those particular ones?
He decided on
He
those
picked them all.
particular ones. So I have all my quilts just stacked one on top of the other on a bed.
Gotcha.
So what we did was pull them all off, and then when we put them back on, he had seen all of them as we pulled them off, and he selected what he wanted to pull out and bring for the
Gotcha.
exhibit.
Okay. And you make these of all sizes. So where do
Yes,
you
I do.
where do you store these?
Of course,
I've
it's
seen
stacked
some
on a bed.
They're just stacked.
Yeah, just stacked.
Well, I've seen some and they're not that thick. They're like
But they're
banner
small.
style.
That's right.
And some are really big.
So the one that's banner style, that's a radiator cover. We have a 100-year-old house, and they have these huge, long radiators. So I thought, and they have, tops on them, and I thought, well, they're just boring. I'll just make some long, skinny
Gotcha.
things. And they're wonderful to work on because when we travel, they're easy to take with me on the plane to work on.
Interesting.
I usually work on something while we're traveling.
So this is a non-stop craft. You can
Well,
just
it can be.
pick it up wherever.
Oh,
really.
he still likes to eat. I have to cook.
How
Yeah, I
dare
have-
you interrupt the process?
I haven't
Garland?
given that
laundry,
up.
all those things.
So some things just can't change.
That's right.
I need my food.
You got
That
it.
is something else. So with the money that you get from some of these competitions, do you generally set a little bit of it aside to try to help with the next project, or do you just stash the cash and keep
Oh,
it
well, I
moving?
did buy a car one year, which
Wow.
surprised Garland. But usually, it helps buying fabric.
Yeah.
I think I've about finished entering the national and international competitions. I've taught in Australia and in Vienna and where else? Oh,
You just
South
say that so
Africa.
casually. Just South Africa, Australia.
Well, but it was because he had scientific meetings.
Right.
And then the quilters found out I was coming along with him, and then they just worked it out for me to teach.
So you were
lecture
somewhat of
while
a
I was
big
there.
deal.
No, I'm not a big deal. I'm just a little
Like,
old lady who
Suzanne's
likes
coming,
to make
we have to
quilts.
have her teach some things.
No, I don't feel like a big deal at all. I just, as I say, a little old lady who likes to make quilts.
I guess that helps you out,
A
girl.
woman with a passion.
Having
I mean,
a
I'm
celebrity
lucky.
wife and all.
I'm lucky. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm
no.
78 years old, and I love going in my sewing room and picking the fabrics that might work for something. You know, I mean, it is a passion.
Yeah. So you say you're probably done entering stuff into the national
The
and
national
internationals.
competitions,
Okay.
yes.
So from here, do you hope to maybe just continue featuring work in galleries?
Well, that would be fun. I mean, I was very complimented that John Troy invited my quilts to come be part of the Boyle Family Gallery. I thought that was really a surprise, a nice surprise. And then I just got an email from someone who wants to exhibit a piece in the Dean of Social Work's home at Washington
Brown.
University, the Brown School of Social Work.
Right.
And so I just get these little surprises. It's fun.
So is there anything that you're working on right now? You got another
yes.
big project
Oh,
stashed?
yes. I'm working on another one from 1565, woodcuts.
Okay.
And this one has a weird man with kind of a fish tail. And so I've put in shells and seagulls and things that relate to the sea. And I'm calling it Rocky Beach.
Rocky Beach. I
I'm
look
on the
forward to seeing
quilting.
it.
I'd show you my fingers from the quilting.
Oh, I see.
That's where I prick my finger. So
Right.
every stitch you see, I prick my finger.
You got to be more careful.
Well, no, I have to know the needle's gone through all the layers.
Right.
Because it's 3 layers: the top,
Wow.
the batting in the middle, and the backing. So I have to, in order to know that I've gone through all 3 layers, I prick my fingers. And I am on the quilting for that. So maybe in a couple of months, if
Interesting.
I keep working on it.
Well, I'd love to have you come back so I can see it, or send us pictures, something.
Oh,
'cause
I will. Well, give
these
me your
things are
email. I'll
amazing.
send it to you. Thank you.
I was looking at the ones in the gallery yesterday, and when John told me that these are hand stitched, it just blew my mind. Because some of these, you've got so many little intricate details, and I can't even believe that you could do some of these things by hand. And like you said, there's 3 layers to these, so these are a
Right.
little thick. You got a lot to do with just hand stitching.
Keeps her out of the mall.
That's the best part, right? Stay home. Don't spend a lot of money out and about. Buy some fabrics and work on this, and then maybe get us some more money from this quilt, right?
Yep.
So you mentioned that you like the woodcuts, getting inspiration from those. So some of the ones in the gallery, where did you get inspiration for those? You just kind of go along and view
Well-
different artworks and say, you know what, I kind of like this. I want to do something with this.
Well, there's one that's vases. It's more traditional. It's pictures of black and white pictures. It is blue and white vases.
Okay.
With flower arrangements. And I spent a long time trying to figure out how to draw flower arrangements. I went to the library and checked out botanical books and looked at gardening catalogs. And that wouldn't have happened except I was with Garland on one of his scientific meeting trips in San Francisco, and I had the day because he was busy, roamed around, found a kind of a warehouse of fabrics, and just thrown on the table was a piece of fabric that had the vases on it. I think
wow.
it's French.
Okay.
And I bought it and I stashed it away, and a couple of years later looked at it and thought, I bet I could do something with this.
That worked out perfectly then.
So, it's different for almost every piece. Hellmouth is from an image I saw on the internet. The mastectomy had to do with my own experience with breast cancer.
Oh, wow.
So what else is in there? Well, other ones from the 1565 manuscript. Let's see, what else? There's something from a German missal from 1170. So I like taking old images and adapting them to fabric.
That is something else.
And I feel, for a while I felt a little guilty about not just drawing everything out, but in a way it keeps these old images alive to be transformed into a different medium.
Yeah.
So I decided not to feel guilty.
No reason for guilt. So it probably helps a lot. Garland, you travel a lot with these science meetings, and you travel a lot with these conventions and things like that. So it probably helps a lot that you have downtime when he's out and about, and you can go check out some different places, because you know, you probably don't find the same fabrics here in the Midwest that you can find on the coast or down south and stuff like that.
I don't usually buy fabrics overseas. They cost a lot more. But what I enjoy doing is taking a lot of photographs, because some of those images may end up as a detail in a quilt.
Right. Interesting.
So that gives me something to look for.
Also going to libraries.
Yes, libraries were great.
And finding different books and different images in books and so on.
Well, the Book of Hours that's in the exhibit was made because I learned that the St. Louis Public Library has a special books collection. It's a rare books collection, and you have to make an appointment to see them. But I did make an appointment and went in, and they had a Book of Hours from, I think, 1504,
Something like that.
1506, sometime. And she let us take pictures of the images. So those images on the quilt are adapted from little tiny, the size of postage stamps, black and white sort of woodcuts from the Book of Hours from 1504. Isn't that?
Yeah,
that's just fun.
So you're able to get those little pictures, and then you say you go and get
I
them
enlarge
blown up.
them, and then I have to redraw them because they're kind of fuzzy
Right.
when they're so small, and then I can't do everything that's in a woodcut, so I may have to add a different flower or
Gotcha.
something.
Garland, do you ever see things while you're out and say, oh, I should show this to Suzanne. This would make a really interesting piece. Do you ever throw some ideas her way and say, well, you know, honey, I think this is a pretty nice thing?
I have to be very careful about that.
Gotcha.
I have to think about that
I
statement.
can't remember an example of me suggesting something.
Well, one of my quilts is adapted from an image on the lampposts in front of the St. Louis Art Museum.
Okay.
Those were designed by Cass Gilbert.
Okay.
And I was meeting a friend for lunch at the museum one day, and she was late, so I was wandering around trying to entertain myself and came face to face with this image on the lamppost and thought, that's my next quilt. So we took a picture of it. In fact, you helped me. You came and helped take a picture, and it was at that time a slide. And then I projected the slide on the wall and put a piece of paper there and drew around the projected image, and that was the middle of my quilt. And then I had to design something around it. But so, I mean, that's why it's fun when I travel with him to look for ideas.
Right, because you can just find these anywhere.
Yes,
I mean,
pretty
on
much
a lamppost, who
architectural
would have thought?
details, right. The funny thing is, I called the library at the St. Louis Art Museum to find out who designed the lamppost. And they said, well, they weren't sure, but they'd call me back. And they did, and they wanted to know why I needed to know that it was Cass Gilbert who designed the lamppost. And I said, well, I made a quilt adapted from an image on the lamppost. So she said, well, will you bring the quilt in to show us? So, you know, it's really embarrassing to take a show and tell in the art museum. I was so embarrassed. But anyway, I went in and I laid it out, and they called people in from the offices to look at it. And one woman came in and shrieked and ran from the room.
Wow.
It turns out she had been spending years trying to identify an image on a picture.
Oh, okay.
And it was the image on the lamppost. She was looking for it in the art museum, not outside the art museum.
Right.
So from my quilt, she was able to identify that slide.
Wow.
Isn't that fun?
That is something.
Quilting has given me so many unusual experiences,
Right.
especially when I teach and I'm with people that I wouldn't ordinarily meet. And quilting guilds don't have a lot of money, so I often stay in people's homes, and it's just been very interesting for me.
So did you ever think, when you were just making ordinary quilts, did you ever think that you would end up here doing these type of things?
Never imagined it.
Wow.
Never tried to. I mean, just sort of happened.
Right. Because this just started off as kind of like a hobby,
Utility
right?
quilts for the kids. If they needed covers on their beds. So I checked out a library book and started making utility quilts for the kids.
And speaking of books, you have a few, correct?
I have 3 books.
So
yes.
tell us about your books. What's in those?
Well, I have put the ideas that I have that have helped me make a quilt. You know, where I've gotten the ideas for a quilt, and then I tell all the good things and all the bad things that the judges have said about the quilts when they've entered competition. So I share the good and the bad, and then Garland wrote his comments in my books.
Ah.
You have to keep it straight.
You
So
get
they're
a writing
little-
credit in there, Garland?
Actually,
they're
I
little-
don't. That's a point of contention.
Well, I tried to put your name. It was the editors that scratched it out. In fact, they said, well, we've never put a husband's comments in a book. But it's interesting. I think we'll leave it in. So all 3 books have his comments.
Wow. Well, you two are truly a tandem. You're helping out left and right, and
Well,
then
now
you
you
always
know
get to
why I
tag
wanted
along.
him part of the interview.
Yes, I'm glad you did come.
I am too.
Not just the chauffeur, you got to be on the show.
That's true.
Well, so with your books also, how do people get those? Do they have to get them from
they
a
can
website?
get them from
or-
me. Yes, they can
Okay.
get them from my website. Or, I mean, they're on Amazon.
All right. And what is your website?
It is www.suzannequilts.com.
SuzanneQuilts.com.
How easy is that?
Make it nice and simple for us.
That's right.
And I took a look at your website yesterday, and I saw some of the flower quilts you had.
Yes.
And those things I love them.
See,
Those
you're
are
like
great.
everybody else. They like the flowers. Me, I like the weirdo things.
No, the weirdo things I love because they're just so different.
Yeah.
Like I said, you think of quilts, you think of a lot of very normal things, so to speak.
Right.
So the flowers are nice and on the normal side, but these things, when I walked in that Boyle gallery, I was like, what? Somebody sew? You can sew these. This is, because I'd never seen a quilt, something like this. So we definitely will have to check out your books. We'll have to
Okay.
take a look at that website
Okay, good.
and put those links down so people watching this can
Good.
get a hold of you.
Good.
And just one of the last questions I have.
Okay.
You said you started with the rocks in this one.
Yes.
How'd you come up with colors and such for this? Is there a particular focal point that you started with?
On this
or did
one,
you just
on the Lou
pick some
Psalter,
colors you liked?
A lot of the images in the Lou Psalter were bright colors like
Okay.
these. So I didn't vary a whole lot. I did have to add various things and had to draw out these borders to connect with strange things.
Right.
Honestly, there are enough strange images in that Lou Psalter that I'd like to make another quilt with.
I'd
Maybe
love to see
different
it.
colors.
Yeah.
But that'll be another couple of years.
Right. Okay. And just how do you, with some of these, you make them so three-dimensional. How are you able to do that
Oh,
just quickly?
Well, the batting, I use a batting with loft, and if I quilt, and I cut the batting out from behind the applique, which would be behind the beast, the strange
Gotcha.
beast, then the batting with loft will fill that image. And I've quilted right next to the edge, so that's holding the background down while the batting is filling the image. Does that make sense?
I got you.
Okay.
Well, these were truly interesting. I greatly appreciate you coming in and showing them to us. Garland, Suzanne, genuinely appreciate having
Thank
you
you.
because I just
It was
think
nice
these are the
talking to
coolest
you.
things. It was nice
Absolutely.
talking to you all, too. Well, that's all we have for today's episode of Corner Gallery. We appreciate you tuning in. And next time we will have David Yates.